Welcome back after your lunch. And let me just begin by apologizing once again for being an absent host. It was very unfortunate that after 2 years of having avoided the dreaded disease, I should succumb to it at this particular stage. And it's affected, as you'll know, both Marco Becht and me at this particular point in time. Following on what Luca Enriquez said at the beginning this morning about there being no toast at the dinner last night, I was going to give one. And I just start off by saying that one of the main points I was going to make at that event was to thank those who were involved originally in establishing GCGC, which includes Marco Becht, Leo Goldschmidt, Gerard Hertig, and in particular, Ron Gilson. I'm not sure if Ron's in the audience at the moment, but particularly like to thank him for having had the brilliant idea of GCGC, and it's all thanks to his initiative that we're here today. So let's give a round of applause to everyone. Okay, this panel discussion follows on the one from yesterday, which was about beneficial ownership and pass-through voting with Luigi Zingales and Sandy Boss. And it's focusing on policies to promote what we've been talking about a lot this morning in relation to purposeful business, responsible business, ESG, etc. And in particular, to look at the policy initiatives that have been taking place in the European context. And there have been a lot of them. There's been, for example, the introduction of the public benefit corporation legislation in Italy, the Entreprises à Mission in France, proposal on stewardship ownership legislation in Germany. There have been numerous forms of initiatives and regulation from the EU in terms of the EU taxonomy, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the Sustainable Financial Disclosure Regulation. And there have been a number of initiatives in terms of corporate governance codes in the UK, which have included corporate purpose, and also one that's recently been introduced in Denmark that does the same. And there's been a stewardship code in the UK alongside the corporate governance code. And there's been, outside of the EU and Europe, initiatives in particular taken by the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation in the creation of the International Sustainability Standards Board. So what we really want to do is to review those policy initiatives and just think through the implications of them and whether or not they're heading in the right direction. And to do that, we've got a tremendous panel. Unfortunately, two of them are having to join remotely for COVID and other reasons. The first member of the panel is Stefano Micossi, who is Managing Director of Assonime, which is the Association of Joint Stock Companies in Italy. He's a former Director General of the European Commission, and he was involved in the founding of the Lewis School of Political Economy, amongst many other things that he's done. The second panel member is Gabriela Figueiredo Dias, who is chair of the International Ethics Standards Boards for Accountants. Previously, she was chair of the Portuguese Securities Commission and a founding member of the Portuguese Corporate Governance Institute. And the third member of the panel, who's, I'm pleased to say, physically present, unlike the rest of us, is Mikkel Friis-Thomsen, who's Senior Vice President of Corporate Strategy and Communications at PFA, the leading pension fund in Denmark, which numbers some 1.3 million private customers out of a total Danish population of 6 million people. So it's a tremendous panel coming from different perspectives, different parts of Europe. Stefano will start off by giving us a corporate perspective on what's been happening. Then Gabriela will look at the issues from the point of view of a standard setter and regulatory perspective. And finally, Mikkel will give an institutional view from particularly the viewpoint of a asset owner. So, Stefano, would you like to begin, please?
Yes, the way we see it is purpose as a further step in the evolution of companies' approach towards a sustainable economy. And the key difference here is that purpose emphasizes companies' direct contribution to create positive externalities in pursuing shareholder value maximization. Deep difference with various CSR initiatives. CSR needs not be intimately tied to the firm's day-to-day decision making, for example, as in a charity, whereas purpose is meant to act as an arbiter of all business decisions. This is the way we stress, what we stress when we discuss with our members. So when adopting purpose, we need to think of reviewing both company strategy and organization to identify, in the language of an important author, the point of intersection between purpose and shareholder value maximization. Is it a win-win game for everybody? Well, the benevolent view is that it is indeed a win-win game, as it results in an enlightened shareholder value, possibly in a rather long term. So shareholders and stakeholders' interests can be both simultaneously maximized, since they structurally tend to converge in the long term. If this was the case, then there would be no need for thinking about these issues in terms of regulation, as it could be expected to develop fairly spontaneously. This view, it seems to us, lacks realism, as trade-offs between shareholder interest and stakeholder interest in companies' day-to-day life are ubiquitous. And all the time, corporate leaders face difficult choices among options with very different effects on shareholders and stakeholders. So an impact on regulatory frameworks is to be expected, and it is important that this is done right. The issue before us is an issue of balancing the interest of shareholders and stakeholders, and to understand the impact on business decisions. So first, if there is a need to balance interest, the adoption of purpose can affect fiduciary duties of administrators and the conditions for the implementation of the business judgment rule. On one side, manager discretion increases as there is no single solution to this balancing problem. And on the other side, much stronger procedures for the motivation of decision by the company bodies, because they become, the decisions, much more complex, as the different interests have to be properly identified, measured, and reported to assess the balance eventually achieved. This raises the question of the possible need. This is where the need to possibly adapt regulatory framework arises. And we need to discuss how constrictive this regulation should be. Colin mentioned already that action has been taken in many countries to promote purpose, the UK, France, Germany, Denmark. In France, you have a société à mission that can be established where bylaws combine the profit purpose and the ESG purpose. It's called the Loi Pact of 2019. In Italy, we don't have general rules addressing the director's fiduciary duties or company purpose. What we have is non-financial disclosure obligation and specific directors' remuneration provisions for big companies. But we have also introduced, as Colin recalled, the benefit company model with a similar regime to the French Société Mission. And the Italian Benefit Corporation main feature, it was introduced by a law at the end of 2015. In the bylaws, the purpose provides that profits and benefits to other parties are combined in the company operations. The director's duties require them to check the balance between shareholders' interest and the effective delivery of the promised benefits. There is also an obligation to disclose the achievement of the benefit by means of a yearly report measuring also the impact on governance, workers, local stakeholders, and the environment. And the company is required to appoint a benefit officer in charge of monitoring the procedure and the steps to deliver the benefit. These are no small feats, and it raises the issue of whether or not the smaller companies can handle such complex requirements. The European Union strategy so far has been centered around sustainable finance with transparency rules on institutional investors. There is here a serious problem with the greening claims. The latest large organization to be caught upon cheating a little bit or maybe a lot is Deutsche Bank again. You've seen in the newspapers in the past few days that the manager in charge of green finance was basically ousted on grounds of cheating with the rules. And this is unfortunately spreading. So sustainable finance, no easy game, but it is developing a lot. And sustainable corporate governance with sustainability reporting obligation, behavior rules for due diligence on human rights and environmental impact, general rules on directors' duty of care, and rules requiring the adoption of business plans to combat climate change in line with the Paris Agreement. The strategy is complemented with the adoption of taxonomies, which have also made some progress, but have also proved rather controversial as a tool. There is then an international dimension of which Gabriela will speak about, but what is happening here, the focus is on the provision of standards for sustainability reporting by companies. And here, the problem for companies is that we have a number of initiatives developing in parallel without a shared consensus, both on the basic principles, different notions of materiality, and on the priorities. Climate first, all sustainability matters at the same time, etc. Different standard setters are also aiming to capture the process with global initiatives in London, the IFRS, overlapping with European initiatives, the restructuring of EFRAG, and with American initiatives by the SEC. The need for coordination in interoperability of standards is always declared but hardly practiced, and companies, as well as I think users of sustainability information, are rather confused by the variety of these approaches. And to conclude, purpose can certainly play a positive role towards a more responsible capitalism. But mandating or forcing its adoption by all companies, in our view, is not to be recommended. Much better would be to find a way to encourage the development of private initiatives. It is important, in our view, the purpose is freely adopted by companies, ready to do it, also to avoid that a generalized rush to the top make green and social washing more difficult to detect. encourage and support the evolution rather than oblige, rather than a mandate, by providing a company model for purpose companies, as was done in some countries, as was mentioned, and by providing a general framework for all companies where maximization of shareholders' value can take into account the interest of relevant stakeholders, as in the UK already, in the new draft EU directive on due diligence and so on. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Stefano, for that great start to the discussion. We'll hear now from Gabriela and then from Mikkel, and then we'll have a short discussion amongst ourselves before Tom Gosling, who's very kindly sitting in for this panel, will handle the Q&A session for everyone in the room. So please do prepare to engage in the discussion in just a short while. So Gabriela, over to you.
Thank you very much, Colin. Thank you very much for the invitation. It is a pleasure and a big responsibility for me to be here among such important speakers, and especially for being invited by you, Colin. I know that I am a fan, and so it's an important moment to me. I'm sorry that I cannot be there due to other professional commitments. I have to travel today, still today, to New York for the ISBA board meeting starting on Monday. Yeah, it was impossible to be there, but I'll do my best and try to be short, although there is so many things to say in this respect. Well, I'll try first to set the scene for this, what I have been asked to talk about, which is how to embed purpose in regulation and standards. And the scene, you know what it is. It has been mentioned today and yesterday a lot of times. And it's the context where, above all, trust has been lost. The scandals, the collapses, the failures of many big companies and big corporate failures have shaken the public trust in a way that the public, the community, stakeholders in general do not that much believe. They do not much believe in the any positive impact of corporations in the well-functioning of the economic and social system. They see a light commitment of those charged with governance of companies with the United Nations SDG. There is a clear misalignment or frequent misalignment of traditional business models with the new but already dominant social and political convictions and agreement around the need for the private sector to contribute to protect the planet and save the people. And so there is a need to embed purpose and ethics at the corporations level. And the big question is how to do it, because once trust is gone, and we know it, once trust is gone, the whole system, the economic system, the necessary match between available money from savers and investors and available productive instruments and projects where that money could be productively used for the benefit of both parties is impaired. And so is the ability of the companies and projects to get the funding they need to be profitable, to meet the regulatory funding requirements and capital requirements, etc. So looking back, we easily come to the evidence that most of the recent corporate collapses and scandals, if not all of them, involve alleged or actual unethical and non-professional behavior by people acting within or on behalf of the corporation. There is a strong lack of trust in the fiduciary duty as it is traditionally designed and shaped. And we are really living in going through a trust crisis. These developments have forced the private sector itself to reassess their roles and the responsibilities, not only towards their shareholders, but also to the company's sustainable future, to the broader community, both local and global, and to the world where we live in. Issues like the focus on ESG, climate change, the pandemic itself, and the social and financial issues that it raised. The Me Too movement and the Ukraine war are some of them causes the other consequences of this context, which led many charged of those charged with governance and senior leadership to question not only the means to an end within the corporation, but also the end itself. And the question is, are any and all means acceptable to pursue profit for shareholders as the ultimate goal of the company, and should profit be the only or even the ultimate purpose? And I think that's more or less unanimously would say no, it is not. So what we have to think is how to drive this embedding of purpose in the corporate culture and corporate behavior, so as to make sure that this purpose is a reality and that we rebuild the trust from investors and of the community, which is a fundamental, essential condition of the functioning of the corporate sector, of the economic system, and ultimately of the welfare of the people. So the public, the community as a whole also wants to know, that big companies, or they want big companies to do the right thing, which is beyond compliance with the law. And this is where I get to the topic of regulation and standards. What we want from the companies and from those in charge of governance of the companies is that they not only comply with the law, but they go, if necessary, beyond the law to do what is right. There are some regulatory examples, for instance, in Norway, where the law for some sectoral law says beyond standards and rules, they have to do the right thing, what is good for the public interest. And the public, and I give you some examples besides sustainability, which is our main topic today. But if I tell you about tax planning, for instance, which I know it's a topic that Colin has been addressing on tax planning, this is exactly the question. Not everything that is legal is right or is ethical, and there is a request, a demand, a call for the companies and those involved in the companies to go beyond that. Public interest is at the heart of all this complex problem, acting in the public interest and acting for the public trust. And acting in the public interest means exactly that those in charge of governance and senior management has to act beyond the interest of shareholders, and consider the interest of shareholders. So it's time for corporate purpose, and it's time to change the culture of companies from shareholder to stakeholder value, from profit only to value creation and people, etc. There is a need to change culture. We have heard Stefano talking about doing this through strategy and organization, and my question is, what has the law and the standards to do with this? We have seen that there are tools and ways to help changing culture. There are many people involved in this ecosystem. It is a path and a process, and that we have to tread. That there is a need to adjust regulation in different areas to make regulation work for the public good. And regulation and standards may for sure help regulate, together with regulating, molding behaviors, molding the protection of interests, etc. I give you some examples where, besides sustainability, the ones that have been mentioned here by Stefano and by Colin, we have already rules on some regulated sectors like the financial sector, where the public interests is above sometimes the private interest or the private scope of pursuing profits. We have the fit and proper rules, which are the requirements for those in charge of governance complying with some fit and proper rules, which is for sure, and to my view, one of the most important actions and interventions of regulation towards changing the culture and embedding ethics in the governance of the companies. But we also have other domains, other areas where regulation can play a role here. Boards composition, boards function, audit committees, financial information, in financial accounting, non-financial information, labor, tax, etc. They are all areas where the regulation and the rules may help changing the culture and changing the behavior of the company and of those in the company who are in charge of making decisions, making options, adopting or not adopting an ethical and values-based approach to the problems. So what's the role of regulation and standards? And coming now to this problem, regulation is there. We have mentioned it. There is a lot of there are a lot of initiatives, regulatory initiatives, which are important for sure. But as Stefano was saying, there is a risk for fragmentation on the one hand, which is a considerable risk, namely when we are talking about sustainability. Different initiatives in the United States, in Europe, the newly created International Sustainability Standards Board that has put out for consultation some standards on non-financial reporting. We have a number of different entities, different international organizations putting forward some proposals. The risk of fragmentation is the one that we can just not have. Convergence, or at least coordination and integration of the different initiatives is key to address this topic. If we fail at the start, as someone said today, it will take us years to correct, to adjust what we have done wrong. So this is the time to do things right. And international standards really play a role here. Standards and regulations are not mutually exclusive, or we cannot say that one are better than the other. They are different and play a different role. There is a rather value in their combination, and we need the power of regulation for sure to impose some rules and behaviors where this is the case, to impose the most structural values for the society. Regulation may help embedding ethics by the way of routine and compliance with rules, etc. But ethical standards and mainly ethical standards can play a significant role in building corporate values and culture. Robust ethics standards address the issues of acting in the public interest and in the public trust. Corporate value is intrinsically tied to ethics, and ethical standards are more than just complying with laws and regulations. They are, as I said before, about doing the right thing, balancing the interest of a much broader group of stakeholders, that they are essentially principles-based and require professional judgment. They avoid the mechanical attitudes and assessment of conformity that sometimes result from the law. And when we are talking about purpose, about something so vague, so subjective, so philosophical in a certain sense as purpose, it is, even if regulation may help promoting the purpose or embedding some routines and some rules within the corporations that help them working for a certain purpose. Purpose is based on ethics, and ethics is essentially an individual thing, something that comes from the inside, something that calls for the individual positioning and choices of each one in charge of governance, in charge of accounting and corporate reporting, etc. So this is the moment where, this is the moment and the space where international standards should come in to make sure two things. First, this need for convergence, this need for a global, unique, or at least consistent approach to the need to create, to embed purpose in these many areas, sustainability for sure, but not only, tax, labor, etc. This is the time for the international standards to play their role in creating a consistent, convergent, global approach to the corporate's responsibilities to a purpose. And this is also the opportunity to create something that regulators may use as well, but that creates a global baseline for the approach of sustainability and purpose in companies. And I'll stop here because I'm conscious of the time. I have a lot of things to say, namely about one more. One of the critical aspects in avoiding wrongdoing from companies and the consequences of this wrongdoing is accounting and corporate reporting. This is the window for the world and the investors and the community to see through to the companies, as well as the audit and assurance to which they are subject. They are the most essential pillars of the trust and confidence of the community, of company stakeholders, etc. And corporate reporting must be subject to ethical standards, strong ethical standards that guide professionals in this area, financial information and non-financial information, which is raising a lot of problems, but they must abide by strong ethical standards, which the AISBA code already provides and on which AISBA is working to adjust them as necessary to the needs of the market, of the investors, of the corporations, of the community in respect to sustainability. They are together with the International Standards, Sustainability Standards Board, newly created. This is a different layer because it applies on the ethical side, and the additional and integratable layer that AISBA provides of international standards, which again can be used by the regulators, but can be used by the individual accountants and professionals and auditors to perform their responsibilities and their work in an appropriate way and sticking to a purpose in the company. And I'll stop here.
Thank you very much indeed, Gabriela, for that intervention. So, Mikkel, over to you.
Yes, I brought a couple of slides, so thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. I speak better when I stand, so that's the way we're going to do it. I think I'm going to start with the notion of trust that was mentioned just earlier, because as Colin mentioned, we are a pension company, or a pension fund in Denmark, and as such we have two different roles. The one is we are a commercial company competing on a commercial market, just at all other companies, and then also we are an institutional investor, investing the pension funds of 1.3 million Danish customers. So we have these three roles, and some of the interesting things about our work with purpose is that how we work to embed and how institutional investors as such work to embed the work with purpose in their activities, both as investors, but of course also as commercial companies. So trust, and I think one of the interesting things about trust is how you actually create it, because trust can be created by many things. It can be created by regulations, yes, as we heard, but especially by the actions that you do, hold up against what you actually say. So that is kind of the cornerstone of doing business. What I'm going to tell is, I'll try and do it fairly short so that we'll have time for the dialogue afterwards, but still, corporate purpose, there's been a development over the last 5-10 years where we've basically been moving from seeing purpose as branding, seeing purpose as communication, to now where purpose is starting, as we earlier heard, to be embedded both directly and indirectly in both soft law and hard law. So let me start with the commercial side. Basically, this is a couple of research reports done by an American corporation called Edelman. They do this trust parameter every year. So what the key conclusion is this: they asked 8,000 consumers amongst 8 countries globally. And what they basically find was that what we could define as the belief-driven buyer is now predominant and is the most predominant consumer globally, basically, towards or besides these 8 these 8 countries. And actually, the people and the consumers out there, they have a higher belief in companies for making change than politicians. And I think based on this notion, I think the whole discussion about purpose and what actually creates trust is very, very interesting. Because is it regulations or is it a demand from the customers that should force or enable companies out there to actually use their purpose as the guiding star for their business? So purpose as strategy. I was so lucky to be invited also to the Enacting Purpose initiative just before COVID. And basically what I think is the very interesting thing about the Enacting Purpose initiative is that it actually provides a concrete framework for board of directors out there to work with their purpose. And actually, there was an article in Harvard Business Review just the year before saying that when looking at high growth companies, what are the key elements in driving that growth? And basically, purpose was one of the 4 primary pillars of high growth. And why is that? Well, that is because it both is a guiding star for developing your business, your value propositions, and the whole business model. But it's also, as I said earlier, a push or a pull from the consumers, because they actually prioritize to buy products and to do business with companies with clear opinions and clear purposes. So what do we do in PFA? We have this quite boring strategy house, but still it's the way we communicate our strategy. We have one goal, and it's say I go into the role as an investor. One of our goals is to put the best, we want to be the best by generating sustainable returns. So what we do, we act as an active owner. Just last week we attended the Total General Assembly with a message saying that we very much agree to their long-term transitioning goals, but we urge them to be more concrete on the shorter goals. And we've had around 5 contacts, meetings with them over the last 5-6 months. So we are in quite intense dialogue with some of the positions that we have in order for them to prioritize and to push this transition towards a greener economy. Because we think and we know that actually there is a profit potential and a performance potential in the long run by changing the business model into a more greener economy. In the lower parts of the slide, you can see the dividends of 2 of our main pension products. The one on the left side is called PFA Plus. And if you look at the high risk, it's the upper left corner with 30 years to pension. We've made on the last 2 years about 26% performance. If you look at the right box, that is the climate product that we have. It's Climate Plus, it's called. And it's basically a pension product where we only invest in climate-friendly or climate-strong investments. And there you can see if you take 30 years to pension and actually high risk also, then we have almost 28% returns in that same period. So basically, investing green is a good business. So that is very interesting because there you link both the customer demand and you link actually also business performance. So I think that's very interesting when we move into the strategies for actually creating a greener economy. So the regulatory framework is also developing. So that is back to what actually creates trust. Trust is a commercial driver, as we saw, and sustainability is a commercial driver. But the culture change that was mentioned earlier that is needed, maybe it helps that there is a little push from both soft and hard law to actually change this culture. The one side is to change it through commercial demand. The other is to do it through soft law. And as was mentioned, that in 2020, both stakeholder dialogue, sustainability, and purpose were actually embedded in the Danish recommendation for corporate governance. And it was the first time, and I've clipped in here the concrete formulations. I'm not gonna go into that, but just to say that the soft law is pushing this culture in Denmark, and so is the commercial results. We can see that from the business models. And the last thing is that hard regulation is also putting a new framework for what we do. When we, for example, state that we invest green, then the new taxonomy is very firm on that we need to document what we do. So we need to document that the investment we call green actually is green towards the customer. And we need to embed it also in the advisory meetings and advisory service we have to our customers. So it becomes totally transparent that they get what they think they get. And actually, the Danish FSA just last year sat down a whole new department working to oversee the taxonomy in Denmark, basically looking into the pockets of the companies to make sure that they actually invest green when they say they invest green. And they actually have almost as many employees in this taxonomy office as they have in the money laundering office. So basically, just to say from regulators and the FSA, it's a really big focus that that green is actually green. Yeah, the case with Deutsche Bank was mentioned earlier, so I don't want to go into this, but still, the financial industry is a big part of transitioning to a green economy. The commercial aspects of actually working strategically with purpose are very big. And there are clear demands, both regulatory and commercially, to succeed with this. So that was my position here.
Great, thank you very much indeed. So what we've just heard is a general acceptance that we certainly need to have some policy initiatives because companies, while they are moving this direction, cannot be expected to do it without some prompting in the form of everything varying from standard setting through soft law in the form of corporate governance to hard law. And what we've seen is very different initiatives in EU with a much greater emphasis on a regulatory approach than is being observed in particular in the US and also in the UK. So just one quick question before I hand it over to Tom to lead the debate in the school is, do you think that the approaches that are being taken in Europe by the international standard setters and by the approaches that emphasize soft law, do you think that those are compatible? And do you think we're really going to get convergence from these very different approaches? If you could all just limit your responses, please, to a minute or so, that would be great. So let me start with you, Stefano.
Yes, I think we've been part in promoting the role of our standard setting organizations at national and European level in taking up a role in this business. And our view has been that this is a good idea because we don't think that the promotion of standards by private organization, profit-seeking in the production of standards is the right approach today. So we are in a way defending a sort of public policy approach to standardization by bodies, European Commission, EFRAG, that is turning from private to semi-public, and national standard organization, better than the taxonomy produced by BNP Paribas as a way to beat competitors at greening or greenwashing. Thank you.
Thank you. Gabriela.
Thank you. Thank you, Colin. Well, at the start, and if you're talking about sustainability, at the start there was a strong call when this all started, a strong call for consistency, convergence, and everybody was saying we can't have fragmentation. Fragmentation is what is going to undermine this wonderful, necessary project of sustainable finance. If we want sustainability to remain credible, we have to have a convergent, consistent, and workable approach to it. That's what the ISSB was about, the International Sustainability Standards Board. It managed to unite, to bring together different different important international initiatives and make the best of it, always with a goal of convergence. IOSCO, the International Organization of Securities Organization, which is very much behind the creation of the ISSB, etc., is absolutely focused on idea of convergence. And to my view, this is the only way to go. There are no other way to go, and this can only be achieved with strong international global standards, which of course do not prevent further developments over these principles, over these international global ethical standards. Going one step back, if you think about what happened, for instance, with corporate governance principles, it was the OECD in 1999 that set some principles, some global international principles, which were at the basis of what we already have around the world, but which is very much convergent and similar. So for me, and it's not because I'm the chair of AIS, but it's because I really believe it, not disregarding I'm not saying that the other initiatives are important, just saying that international global standards are important and that the other initiatives should take them into consideration. This is our concern. This is the concern of most of the global international standard setters, and this should be the way to go.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mikkel?
Yeah, I think the important thing is that there should be level playing field for companies working in the same industries. For example, in the financial industry. Before we had the taxonomy and all financial companies worked towards the taxonomy, it was not defined what is actually green. So the risk of being accused of greenwashing and the risk for the consumers not really understanding what they were getting and buying in their pension or in the financial products, that was not transparent. So the good thing about the taxonomy and both the soft and the hard law is that it creates a level playing field. And I think the level playing field is a very positive thing towards the consumers, because then it's transparent and they know what they're going to get. So the risk of greenwashing and the risk of actually keeping on diminishing the trust, that I think the common standards and both the hard and the soft law is very important in that relation.
Thank you very much indeed. So, Tom, over to you to...
well, thank you, Colin, and thanks to all the panelists for those insightful contributions. We're going to throw it open to the floor now for any observations people want to make or questions people want to ask. Do we have anybody wanting to ask anything or observe? Yeah, Jennifer.
Thanks, everyone. That was quite fascinating. I just wanted to ask you this need, it's been said there's just a cacophony out there in terms of different standards, and you're very much saying how important it is that there should be some consistency in the way we view these things. And it took me back to post-global financial crisis, where the then Secretary General of IOSCO, David Wright, was talking about this global push post financial crisis to basically deal with financial risks. And he said at the time that the next crucial need would be to change the behaviour, ethics and incentives in firms. And I just wonder, to what extent did the lessons of the financial crisis in terms of, just coalescing transnational regulatory attempts, etc., to what extent do they set the scene for what we're seeing now, or are we in a very different ballgame?
I think we'll just take a couple of questions and then go back to the panel. Thank you, Jennifer. We had a question here.
Thank you. So your call for consistency and standardization, leveling the playing field, one way to go, at least with regards to some of the sustainability issues that we are facing, could be to involve the sciences more. And I would just wonder what your view is on how these standard setting bodies that are out there should, in fact, involve sciences, with the difficulties that this actually creates, because there is also not a uniform view on all these issues in the sciences.
Okay, and sorry, was there another question behind that? Oh yeah, Eric.
Thank you so much. And I have a two-part question, if it's okay. And the first one is to everyone, and the second one is especially to Gabriela, who I've worked with in the Takeover Bids network. So I'm a company lawyer, and when I hear you say this, my first question is, what do you mean when you say that you want to work with regulation? Is it that you want companies to in a kind of you want companies to have a let's say a softer purpose in some sense, a purpose that's of a kind of managerial or at a managerial level in the company, or do you actually want to change the purpose of the corporation as it is set out in company law? And from I think the dominant legal perspective here, that's a part of a kind of standard financial contract. I think that's the general way this is viewed in European company law, at least. And if the latter is the case, and this is where I direct my question to you, especially Gabriela, given how extremely complicated harmonization is in our area. It's one of the discussions we have 2 times a year in the takeover area, even where there is a takeover directive that helps us get a common direction. Do you think it's realistic that everything that this would impose, right? So if you were to take this serious and you wanted to change the purpose of the corporation to have an effect, you would also have to include a change of the regulation that somehow manages the market for corporate control, because otherwise that would probably override the purpose. You will have to change the rules on how remuneration is set. You will have to change the rules on how shareholders probably appoint directors, since the control which comes from hiring and firing and setting the compensation of top level management. All those things are interconnected, and I think we would then have to harmonize all of this. Do you think that's a realistic ambition, or do you even think it's a good ambition to have, given the differences in corporate governance systems around the world? Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. So what I'm going to suggest is that rather than all of you answering kind of all 3 questions, pick the one that sort of interests you most and where you most feel you have something you wish to contribute. But perhaps, Mikkel, do you want to pick an aspect of that you'd like to respond to?
Yeah, I think it was interesting that the financial crisis was mentioned earlier. I think what the financial crisis did was to create a trust crisis, and basically that also was a trust crisis towards the politician and the regulatory authorities. And I think that is some of the reasons why we've seen the hard law developing. I think the need to create and to restore trust among both the public and the consumers and the politicians is the reason why these level playing fields and these common frameworks and regulations make sense. Because on the other side, the best thing would be to actually change a culture towards a green economy and towards embedding purpose in the strategies would be commercial reason. Because basically, companies out there, they need to make money. They also have shareholders and not only stakeholders. They have broad stakeholder pictures. So I would say The financial crisis started a trust crisis, and that is why we need to play on more tones on the piano, so to speak.
Okay, thank you very much. Stefano, perhaps I could come to you, and I mean, let's assume that the question on corporate law will ultimately be answered by Gabriela. But Stefano, would you like to comment on either of the other two issues?
Yes, do you hear me? You know, listening, maybe, forgive me if I turn the issue around a little bit. There are two things that I would like to stress. First, keep in mind that much of what is going on reflects a huge mounting pressure on companies to respond to evolving social standards that they cannot ignore. This is an important point. The idea that companies are out of simply trying to cheat on this, I understand the point of lack of confidence, but doesn't stand to reason. I was in several boards. I've seen it again and again, that there is a genuine effort to respond to a European legislation that is asking companies to declare how they have acted to incorporate certain values into their business strategies. And this is no simple game for administrators. And this is no simple game for management. So the two things that I would like to stress here is, first, before we come to hard law, I think we have to develop a recognized, transparent system of standards of reporting. The first thing we need to clear out is, you know, how much are we asking from companies, and what are the way to communicate by the companies how far they've gone in respecting these values. And this is item one. Item two, changing the purpose of companies. Well, I think some companies are struggling to find a specific purpose that is strongly in line with, say, environmental goals, because this is good money to be made. Say, SNAM is now investing in the use of hydrogen as an alternative technology. This is becoming their main purpose. This is also good money if they succeed. They are taking big risks and they are investing long term. But this is purpose. The fact that every company is now struggling to respect large company, to respect gender balance, the treatment of personnel, environmental goals, this is a fact. So there is a sort of enormous bubbling front where companies are trying to advance in the respect of social pressure and social goals. And I don't think there is a single way to drive them to a result. I think it's much more important, as I said before, that to have reporting standards help them communicate what they are doing and also check whether what they are doing is right or wrong or sufficient and insufficient. Thank you.
Ella, perhaps I could direct you to a question.
Sorry. The question was the question about the last one, you mean?
Last question about the mechanisms of implementing purpose, whether you see that coming through a change to corporate law requirements, yeah. And if you do, the extent to which that's feasible given harmonisation challenges. Is that fair?
Okay, as far as I can respond. Well, first thing, I think that sometimes the need for changing the law is not as realistic and as real as some people say. I'll tell you, for instance, in Portugal, this idea that we would have to change the corporate definition of or the legal definition of corporation. We have a rule since 1986 that says something like the duty of the managers and those in charge of governance is to serve the interest of the company, serving the long-term interests of the partners or the shareholders, and taking into account the interests of other relevant parties such as employees, clients, and creditors in ensuring the sustainability of the company. This is a rule, a provision from 1986. Of course, we have formal, legal, rigid definitions of cooperation, but this is probably one of the reasons why standard setting and soft law plays such an important role. Because when the law is not able to capture the changes and the evolutions in the outside world and is not flexible, agile enough to develop, to allow interpretations which match the needs of the society at a certain stage, then we have two options: or we change the law, or we go to the soft law to solve a number of problems. I don't see, I have a very clear idea here. And the first one is that first, it is probably not that necessary to change anything or to change everything as long as we get the right interpretation of the law. The interests of the stakeholders and the interests of the shareholders does not mean, and it's not, most of the time it's not written in the law, that it has to be exclusively a profitable interest. Interests takes a lot of things inside. My response is, of course, not a response. Do I think that it's realistic? Yes. Do I think that it's easy? No. But as long and as far as we have the conviction that this is the way that it should go, and that the law as it is, if it's not possible to interpret the law in the way that it should be, and that the law is not serving our purpose as citizens, community, society, etc., then we have to do anything, and we have to change the law.
Very much. Colin, I will give you the opportunity to make a few kind of summarising remarks in a minute. We are now extending into the coffee break, so I'm just going to allow one more question, which I'd already... Oh, you did not have a question. Okay. Well, do you want to ask your question then, given I'm allowed one more question?
Sure. This is from Mikkel. What makes your engagements most successful, and if they're not successful, what do you do?
We have, for example, in the fossil fuel industry, we have narrowed down our positions from basically 20 smaller positions into 2 larger positions. And we have those in Shell and in Total. And what we did recently with Total was to put up quite specific and concrete KPIs, so to speak, to what we would like them to act upon if we were to continue our ownership. So that is, for example, what we do. And as I told earlier in my presentation, we've had 5 or 6 touch points with Total over the last 6 months. And of course, if they don't deliver in the longer run on the demands and the dialogues that we have with them, then of course we need to consider if we still want to invest in the company. So that is the narrowing down at having higher or bigger positions in the companies. And the other is of course the international investor corporations that then sum up to larger assets under management and then drive the dialogue through those corporations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the panelists. It's been a great discussion. Sorry, we are now getting to the point where probably we need to let people get on a cup of afternoon tea. But Colin, perhaps I'll hand back to you to make some closing remarks.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Tom. And thank you to all of our panel. I thought the ideas that were emerging on the panel in terms of the way in which standardization and regulation together are moving companies in a direction in which they are taking the notion of purpose more seriously is an important observation, and that a great deal can be done within the context of existing corporate law in that regard, without going to the extreme of having to change corporate laws, which we all recognize are extremely difficult and may not be desirable to do in any event. So I think those notions that came across in this panel were very consistent across the three speakers and give a really very helpful notion as to the direction in which we're currently moving, both in Europe and in the rest of the world. So thank you very much indeed to all of the panelists for what I thought was a great discussion, and I'm extremely grateful to you for having stimulated it.